Between 1870 and 1871, France and Prussia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, were at war. In the end, the Prussians were the victors, allowing for the completion of the German unification. Afterwards, the Spanish monarch Alfonso XII planned to take a trip to various countries, including France. However, while in France he passed through Paris and was insulted and even occasionally attacked in the street. After hearing about this, Lejar, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, declared war on France, and this war would go on for the next 98 years. But the weird thing is not a single shot was fired in the whole 98 years, and not a single casualty was sustained. In 1976, King Juan Carlos of Spain travelled to Paris, and while he was there, he was treated with respect by the citizens of Paris. In 1981, the town council of Lejar declared that in view of the excellent attitude of the French, they would end the war and agree ceasefire. Too bad there was no fire to cease in the first place. The Anglo-Zanzibar War, fought between the United Kingdom and the Zanzibar Sultanate, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, on the 27th of August 1896, holds the record for the shortest war in history. It started after Sultan Hamad bin Fouani died 2 days before the war started, and his nephew Khalid bin Bargash seized power. The British favoured another candidate known as Hamoud bin Muhammad because they believed they would be easier to work with, and so they delivered an ultimatum ordering Bargash to abdicate. When Bargash refused, he fortified his palace with as many troops as he could, but during this time the British forces had moved in 5 warships and landed parties of Royal Marines on the coast. The British then opened fire on the palace, and after 38 minutes the shelling stopped when the British got word that Bargash had left the area in surrender. Wait, hold on. What? And after 38 minutes the shelling stopped. Well, they weren't kidding about it being the shortest war in history. And just to make this war even weirder, 500 Zanzibar soldiers were killed or wounded. The HHS Glasgow was sunk, 2 boats were sunk, and a shore battery was destroyed. But for the Brits, the only thing that happened to them was that one of their sailors was wounded. I guess the war was pretty one-sided, huh? In 1325, Bologna and Modena declared war on each other when Modenese soldiers stole the bucket from the city well.
No, he be stealing my bucket.
But in reality, the war was a result of the 300-year-long struggle between Guelphs and Gwilbelines. Don't know if I'm pronouncing those words correctly. The war only featured one battle, known as the Battle of Zapalino, which caused a total of 2,000 casualties, and even after this battle the bucket wasn't returned, and even to this day, almost 700 years later, the stolen bucket remains in the possession of Modena. It's the year 1864 and the president of Paraguay decides to himself, I'm a big admirer of Napoleon Bonaparte and a skilled tactician and an excellent commander, but I lack one thing that Napoleon had, a war. So because of this, I'm going to declare war on practically all of South America. The war was Paraguay versus Brazil, Argentina and Uruguay, and ended in a bitter defeat for Paraguay when they lost around 300,000 soldiers and civilians, including around 80% of their entire male population. Meanwhile, the Triple Alliance only lost a total of around 100,000 soldiers and civilians. The war started with Paraguay trying to win with conventional war, but when this proved ineffective, they switched up their tactics to a guerrilla approach, which only worsened the situation for Paraguay, eventually leading to their defeat. The war ended in 1870 on the 1st of March after the president of Paraguay was killed. The Aroostook War, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, took place in 1838 to 1839 between the United States and the United Kingdom over the border of Maine. The war was started when American woodcutters cut firewood in British territory, and this caused both the UK and the US to move troops into the area, but for the next 11 months, no battles would be joined. The only casualties of this war were the people who died of disease and accidental injuries. Also, fun fact, this war is also sometimes known as the War of Pork and Beans, because due to logistical mistakes the Americans received large amounts of pork and beans. In 1859, an American farmer caught a pig in his garden eating his crops. He was so upset by this that he took aim and shot the pig dead. The British person who owned the pig demanded payment for the pig's death, and the American offered $10, but the Brit declined the offer and demanded $100 instead. The American then believed that he should not have to pay for the pig's death, as it was trespassing on his property. The Brit then threatened to arrest the American, but following this the American called in military protection and the war began. However, this war would then go on for 15 years and no shots would be fired and no soldiers or civilians would die, so in the end the only casualty of the war was the pig. In 1651, the Isles of Scilly, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and the Netherlands declared war on each other, and they would then be at war for the next 335 years, making this one of the longest wars of all time. But the weird thing about this war is that in the whole 335 years that the war went on for, not a single shot was fired, and not a single person died, making this one of the longest bloodless wars of all time. 1969, El Salvador and Honduras declare war on each other. 4 days later, the war ends with a total of around 3,000 people dying. The cause of the war was mostly due to the concerning immigration from El Salvador to Honduras, and these tensions collided with the 1970 FIFA World Cup qualifier, hence the name the Football War. The Moldovan Transnistrian War, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, began shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when Moldova faced a crisis. 2/3 of the country wanted closer ties with Romania, but the remaining third wanted to remain with Russia. As a result, a war broke out, but what makes this war especially weird is the fact that at night time, the officers and other soldiers would meet together and start drinking, but at daytime they would resume their fighting. Wonder how that feels, at daytime shooting the guys and then at night time being drinking buddies. In 1932, the Campion district of Western Australia began a nuisance wildlife management operation to address the public concern over the numbers of emus in the area. Soldiers were sent out with machine guns, but when they started firing at the crowd of emus, they realised that they were a lot more resistant than they thought. The creatures resisted multiple machine gun bullets and easily outran the soldiers. The so-called war lasted a week before being called off after the commander got frustrated that his men were only able to kill 2,500 of the 20,000 emus. That's it for this list guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!